'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house, not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. Welcome to Witch Hunt, the podcast of the witch trials and more. I'm Josh Hutchinson.
And I'm Sarah Jack. For the holidays, we thought we'd pick a lighter topic than usual. So today we look into the roots of Christmas as we know it today in the United States.
We tend to think of holiday traditions as timeless. However, they all had to start somewhere.
You may be surprised by how recently many of our traditions were created.
For example, Santa Claus was created in the 19th century, just about 200 years ago.
In fact, many of our revered traditions were developed in the 19th century.
We wouldn't recognize the Christmas observed before then.
As we'll explain, the winter holidays were more like carnival than the more sedate, family-oriented Christmas most Americans celebrate today.
In this episode, we'll peel back the layers of today's holiday to reveal the true origins of the invented traditions we know now.
In his wonderful book, The Battle for Christmas, A Cultural History of America's Most Cherished Holiday, historian Stephen Nissenbaum defines invented traditions as customs that are made up with the precise purpose of appearing old-fashioned.
Remarkably, this is how many of our timeless traditions came to be.
But Christmas wasn't popular in all corners of early American society, especially not in colonial New England.
In fact, Christmas was so reviled by many Puritans that they banned the practice in both England and Massachusetts.
The ban did not hold up long in England, but ran from 1659 to 1681 in Massachusetts.
And the law was only repealed there in the face of pressure from the restored English monarchy, who threatened to pull the Massachusetts Bay Colony's charter, the foundation of its self-governance, due to the passing of many laws that were in conflict with English law, as well as other colonial actions which the king found repugnant.
Despite repealing the Christmas ban, by the way, the colony still lost its charter and was placed under the authority of a royal governor who answered to the king.
And even after the ban was lifted, Puritan churches did not hold Christmas services, and people were expected to work on Christmas Day, unless it was a Sunday, in which case the normal Sunday services were held.
It is commonly believed that the Puritans banned Christmas because they were the enemies of fun. However, the real reason for the ban was more complicated.
For one thing, Christmas was not the peaceful family holiday many people currently observe.
Christmas revelries could easily get out of hand, resulting in theft, property damage, and sometimes violence.
You see, in those times, Christmas was more like the carnival celebrations we associate with the approach of Lent.
And some elements are the same as what we've heard about in researching the history of Halloween.
Many of these elements can be traced back to pre-Christian winter festivals in Europe, like winter solstice observances, Rome's Saturnalia, and the Germanic Yule holiday.
Saturnalia, the feast of the god Saturn, was itself based upon the earlier Greek celebration called Chronia, the feast of Kronos, and Cronus, essentially the Greek equivalent of Saturn.
Chronia was a time when social hierarchies were thrown out the window, people from all walks of life celebrated together, and masters served their servants.
Enslaved people were granted much more liberty than in ordinary times and were able to celebrate and fill the Athenian air with the sounds of their jubilee.
These themes of rampant equality and social inversion were carried on by the Romans with Saturnalia, which was held annually from December 17th through December 23rd.
Like many fall and winter holidays, Saturnalia was a harvest festival, observed at a time of year when fresh crops were in, agricultural workers had some freedom from work, and animals were slaughtered to prepare for winter.
These were days of leisure for many people when food and drink were abundant and had to be consumed or preserved for the coming months.
It was a natural time for feasting and letting loose when food, drink, and sex were all on the table.
This, of course, would later trouble the Puritans and many other Christians, who were shocked by the rock and roll lifestyles of the ancients.
For the Puritans, the link between Christmas and the feast of Saturn was a problem. There were people in New England who refused to even name the days of the week.
For such people, Saturday was not Saturn's day, it was simply the sixth day. And Christmas was certainly not to be observed by letting go of inhibitions.
If Christmas was to be observed at all, and many believed it should not be celebrated. It should be observed quietly and solemnly, reflecting on Christ's life and sacrifice.
But should Christmas be acknowledged? According to many leading Puritans, the answer was a resounding no.
The Puritans believed in only observing religious customs, rites, and holidays spelled out in the Bible.
And there is no passage in Scripture that instructs followers of Christ to observe the day of his birth.
Furthermore, nobody knows the date when baby Jesus was born. The Bible doesn't even offer clues to the season, except that we can probably rule out winter because shepherds in Israel would not have been in the fields with their sheep at night during the winter.
Even the year of the Nativity cannot be pinned down. According to the Bible, the birth occurred during the reign of Herod, who died in the year we now label 4 BCE, meaning Jesus was likely born between 6 and 4 BCE, not in the year 1 CE.
For all these reasons, Puritan ministers opposed Christmas. However, not all of their parishioners did.
Many holiday customs were transported from England to New England in the 17th century, and some colonists were determined to observe them.
We have spoken on this podcast about a Christmas celebration that went horribly awry in Hartford, Connecticut.
Confusion over the observance and its meaning contributed to the Hartford witch panic and to witchcraft accusations against the Christmas keepers, including Rebecca Greensmith, who confessed that the devil told her that at Christmas they would have a merry meeting.
In undated testimony, eyewitness Robert Stern described seeing Rebecca in the woods with others. He said, "I saw this woman Goodwife Seeger in the woods with 3 more women, and with them I saw 2 black creatures like 2 Indians, but taller.
I saw likewise a kettle there over a fire. I saw the women dance round these black creatures, and whiles I looked upon them, one of the women, Goodwife Greensmith, saith, Look who is yonder. And then they ran away up the hill.
I stood still, and the black things came toward me, and then turned to come away. He further saith, I know the persons by their habits or clothes, having observed such clothes on them not long before."
This may or may not have been what Rebecca Greensmith referred to in her confession.
In 1662 in Beverly, Massachusetts, a fisherman named William Hoare was ordered not to allow the people visiting him on Christmas Day to drink alcohol.
William was the husband of future Salem Witch Trial suspect Dorcas Hoare.
17 years later, in neighboring Salem Village, 4 younger men went out wassailing on Christmas night, hoping to obtain alcoholic beverages and perhaps other gifts from 72-year-old John Roden.
The young men included Samuel Braybrook, who in 1692 would be tasked with transporting Sarah Good from Salem Village to Ipswich following her witchcraft arrest,
and who went on to testify against our mutual ancestor Mary Esty.
Another wassailer that night in 1679 was Joseph Flint, who would testify against witchcraft suspects George Jacobs Sr. and Margaret Jacobs in 1692.
Benjamin Fuller was also with the Christmas keepers that night. He was one of the 36 men who refused to contribute to the minister's salary when Samuel Parris was ordained in Salem Village in 1689.
The fourth wassailer was Joseph Foster.
According to John Roden's account, he, his wife Mary, and their stepson Daniel Poole were home when the 4 merrymakers came knocking at about 9 p.m.
The 4 visitors sat themselves by the fire, and Foster and Fuller began singing.
After 2 songs, Braybrook asked Roden if the songs were worth a cup of perry, a pear wine.
Roden said he didn't like the singing and asked the men to leave.
Benjamin Fuller said it was Christmas Day at night, and they came to be merry and to drink perry, which was not to be had anywhere else but here, and perry they would have before they went.
Roden told them they should have none there.
Joseph Foster said he had traveled from town and didn't have money on him. He asked Braybrook to order 2 pots of perry and promised to pay him back.
Now, Mary Roden told the men they weren't running a licensed tavern.
The wassailers left after this, but 15 minutes later, 3 of them, Foster, Braybrook, and Flint, returned.
Foster told the Rodens he had borrowed money and could now pay for perry.
John and Mary Roden asked to see the money, which turned out to be a piece of lead rather than a coin.
The 3 men left, but stopped a short distance away and called out to the Rodens.
Samuel Braybrook asked Daniel Poole how to get to Marblehead, but Poole told him to go home to his wife.
Braybrook challenged Poole to come out and fight. and Flint said if he wanted to box, he would box with him for a pot of perry.
Then the men grew destructive, throwing stones, bones, and other things at Poole in the doorway and against the house.
This went on for about an hour and a half.
The men also broke down a long stretch of stone fence, broke into a cellar, and stole a lot of apples.
On March 12, 1680, Samuel Braybrook petitioned the court, apologizing for sinning and breaking the law. He said it was the first time he had so transgressed.
The records and files of the quarterly courts of Essex County do not indicate the outcome of the case against the wassailers.
As shown by this incident, rituals of misrule and social inversion remained in place long after the Roman Catholic Church replaced Saturnalia and celebrations of the winter solstice with Christmas in the 4th century.
The addition of Christmas to the church calendar came after Christians had for 3 centuries not observed a day as the anniversary of Christ's birth.
Throughout the early centuries of Christianity, believers did not place much importance on the birth of Christ. It was his rebirth and his impending return that drew more attention.
And so the Christians of the first 3 centuries AD did not have Christmas.
However, in the 2nd century AD, a group of Christians in Egypt began to celebrate Jesus' baptism on the day now known on the liturgical calendar as Epiphany, the celebration of Christ's manifestation to the Gentiles.
Over time, this celebration spread across the Greek-speaking portion of the Roman Empire and grew to incorporate Christ's birth and the Magi arrival in Bethlehem.
Christmas was not the only Christian holiday to take the place of an earlier non-Christian festival.
Indeed, the Egyptian Christians may have selected January 6 for Epiphany because the Greeks had celebrated the birth of Aeon from the virgin goddess of Kore on that day.
Kore was a form of the goddess Persephone, and Aeon may have been a form of the god Dionysus, who had been reborn after being killed by the Titans.
Bacchus was the Roman equivalent of Dionysus. You may recognize him from his feast called Bacchanalia, another festival which many Christians found to be the time of too much licentiousness.
Meanwhile, Christians in the western part of the Roman Empire continued to abstain from observing Jesus' birth until after Emperor Constantine converted and made Rome a Christian empire.
It was during or shortly after the reign of Constantine that Latin-speaking regions began observing Christ's birthday.
At the time the church adopted December 25th for Christ's birthday, that date fell on the winter solstice, the moment when days began growing longer following the longest night of the year.
This day was observed by many Romans as the birthday of the sun god Sol Invictus.
So Romans went from celebrating December 25th as Dies Natalis Solis Invicti, the birthday of the god of the unconquered sun, to celebrating it as Christmas, the birthday of Christ, who is known as the immortal Son of God.
From the god of the sun to the Son of God, Roman religion was being shaken from the foundation.
Both Epiphany and Christmas began to be observed across most of the Roman Empire in the 4th and 5th centuries,
and made their way into the ecclesiastical calendar by 567, when the Council of Tours created the 12 days of Christmas, declaring that every day between Christmas and Epiphany was a festival.
Now that's a tradition I could get behind. This council also created the season of Advent, during which Christians were tasked with preparing for Christmas and for Christ's return.
The pre-Christian festivals we have discussed so far are not the only ones to feed into the Christmas season.
And the Romans weren't the only ones partying in the winter. To their north, the Germanic and Scandinavian peoples were celebrating Yule.
Many of our contemporary Christmas traditions, such as those Yule logs we love to watch burn on TV, came from this festival.
Wassailing, the predecessor of caroling, may also have developed during the centuries when Yule was broadly celebrated in Northern Europe.
The earliest known reference to Yule comes from a 6th century Gothic calendar, which refers to what we call November as Fruma Julis, meaning before Yule.
The holiday is also mentioned by the Venerable Bede and by the authors of several sagas.
As Christianity spread to the Germanic lands, Yule was absorbed into Christmas.
This syncretic method of absorbing local customs into Christianity created Christmas as we know it by fusing Saturnalia, the solstice, Yule, and other influences.
Christmas was initially more of a festival for adults than the family-oriented holiday we observe these days.
In the words of Increase Mather, the Puritan divine from Boston, the generality of Christmas keepers observe that festival after such a manner as is highly dishonorable to the name of Christ. How few are there comparatively that spend those holidays, as they are called, after an holy manner, but they are consumed in computations and interludes, in playing at cards, in revellings, and in excess of wine, in mad mirth.
Increase's son Cotton later put it this way: the feast of Christ's nativity is spent in reveling, dicing, carding, masking, and in all licentious liberty, by mad mirth, by long eating, and by hard drinking, by lewd gaming, by rude reveling.
In England in 1725, the Anglican priest Henry Bourne of Newcastle echoed the Mather's sentiments and went on to describe the horrors of mumming and caroling.
Mumming involved men dressing as women and women dressing as men. In these guises, people went around to neighbors' homes to celebrate Christmas, an occasion, in Bourne's words, of much uncleanness and debauchery.
According to Bourne, singing Christmas carols was disgraceful, usually only done in the midst of rioting and chambering and wantonness.
Chambering basically meant fornication, as in the act of taking someone to your bedchamber.
Now let's talk about some of the ways we still observe Christmas today, in addition to the caroling and religious services we've already mentioned.
Green plants have long been a part of winter festivals. In particular, evergreen plants have been important pieces of celebration going back to ancient times.
Such greenery was used in both Roman and Germanic festivals.
In many Northern European countries, garlands and wreaths had practical functions as well as decorative ones.
Evergreen boughs were placed strategically around the home to ward off evil spirits and even witches. It was seen as especially important to protect entrances to the home, so evergreen boughs were placed on doors and windows and near chimneys and wells.
There's a story from the New England Witch Trials about witchcraft suspect Rachel Fuller being prevented from entering a home when sweet bays were laid under the threshold.
In addition to their uses in counter magic, evergreens just smell good, right? So thank you, Christmas trees, garland, and wreaths, for making breathing more pleasant without harsh chemicals.
Christmas trees are a relatively recent innovation, though they may have been based upon older traditions.
It is commonly believed that Christmas trees originated in Germany, and that does seem to be true. However, the tradition predates the modern nation of Germany and was practiced outside of the current boundaries of that nation.
The modern Christmas tree first appeared in northern Germany and Livonia, now Latvia and Estonia, in the 15th century.
It was not until the 1830s, however, that Christmas trees became fashionable in the United States.
Trees were initially decorated with wax candles, small gifts, fruits, and nuts. Later, glass ornaments and other touches were added.
In fact, popcorn garland may have been hung on Christmas trees in Williamsburg, Virginia, as far back as 1842, if not even earlier.
Popcorn was then, as now, cheap and easy to come by, so it was a very practical way to dress up a tree, which I have done.
Turning our attention now to those gifts hanging on the trees, we find that the tradition of gift giving during winter festivals dates back to the ancients, but has taken on many wildly different forms over the years.
The Romans exchanged gifts during Saturnalia, often wax figures known as sigillaria.
And the Christian Gospel of Matthew declared that the wise men or magi had given the baby Jesus 3 gifts: gold, frankincense, and myrrh.
By the way, the Gospel of Matthew also describes the wise men entering the house where the baby Jesus rested, not the stable.
And the Gospel of Luke simply says Jesus was initially laid in a manger, as there was no room in the inn. No mention of the stable or cave. The manger is where the shepherds visited Jesus, apparently well before the wise men arrived.
Neither Matthew nor Luke shed much more light on the Nativity, and much of the scene we picture today was invented as legends developed about the Christ child's birth.
Not every gospel written made it into the Bible, and there's a whole subgenre of non-canonical infancy gospels, including the Gospel of James and the infancy Gospel of Thomas.
The Gospels that made it into the Bible do not reference the presence of animals in the stories of the visits by the shepherds or the wise men, which occurred on separate, unspecified dates.
However, the 2nd century Gospel of James tells of a son of Joseph leading a donkey to Bethlehem.
In this version of the Nativity, Jesus is born in a cave on the way to Bethlehem.
The wise men are mentioned in the Gospel of James, but are not named until about the year 500, when they are listed in a Greek manuscript.
Despite the gift-giving present in the biblical account of the Nativity, Christmas keepers did not exchange gifts in our modern way until pretty recently, with manufactured gifts being purchased beginning only in the 19th century.
When gifts were exchanged earlier on, it was often part of wassailing, when it was those who were better off giving to the less fortunate out of a sense of either noblesse oblige or a desire to ward off rowdier behavior.
But in the 19th century, people in the US and elsewhere started to think of the children, because wasn't it rewarding to give gifts to our own kids and bask in their happy glows?
Much more rewarding than reluctantly giving to people you barely knew, if at all.
The shift toward giving presents to children was part of a large shift toward a more peaceful, domestic Christmas.
The carnival-like atmosphere and much of the raucousness disappeared, and being with family became the most important thing about the holiday.
The Christmas shift reminds me of what happened with Halloween in the middle of the 20th century, when the Wild Night was partially reined in and children's trick-or-treating took center stage.
Another way Americans recentered Christmas around children was to invent a colorful character to deliver many of the presents.
Did you know that Washington Irving, author of Sleepy Hollow, wrote stories about St. Nicholas that significantly contributed to the development of Santa Claus?
Irving and his literary friends, known as the Knickerbockers, wrote many of the earliest stories and poems about St. Nicholas in the U.S.
The Knickerbockers worked to invent the tradition first of visits from St. Nicholas and later of visits from Santa Claus, which were supposedly based upon ancient Dutch traditions.
In fact, the Knickerbockers were named for Irving's 1809 book, Knickerbocker's History of New York, a parody which referenced St. Nicholas 25 times.
One passage from the Knickerbockers' History of New York says, "And the sage Olaf dreamed a dream, and lo, the good St. Nicholas came riding over the tops of the trees in that self-same wagon wherein he brings his yearly presents to children."
And when St. Nicholas had smoked his pipe, he twisted it in his hatband, and laying his finger beside his nose, gave the astonished Van Cortlandt a very significant look. Then mounting his wagon, he returned over the treetops and disappeared.
Santa scholar Charles W. Jones wrote that, without Irving, there would be no Santa Claus. Santa Claus was made by Washington Irving.
Knickerbocker writings directly fed the famous 1823 poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas, which is also known as The Night Before Christmas.
This poem is attributed to Clement Clarke Moore, whose great-great-great-grandfather, John Moore, may be the same John Moore who served on juries in the witchcraft trials of Mary Johnson, Catherine Palmer, Joan and John Carrington, and Margaret and Nicholas Jennings.
This poem created many of the features of Santa Claus we know and love today.
His look was further stamped into America's minds through images drawn by Thomas Nast in 1863 and 1881. Nast also developed the idea that Santa lives at the North Pole.
In the later 1800s, stores started using Santa displays to attract customers during the Christmas season. And in the 1890s, children first flocked to stores to visit men costumed as Santa.
Over time, Santa was used in more and more advertising displays.
And even headlined major parades.
In the 1930s, Coca-Cola advertisements cemented the picture of Santa in his red suit.
And now Sarah and I would like to read the well-known poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas. 'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house, not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there.
The children were nestled, all snug in their beds, while visions of sugar plums danced in their heads. And Mama in her kerchief and I in my cap had just settled our brains for a long winter's nap. When out on the lawn there arose such a clatter, I sprang from my bed to see what was the matter.
Away to the window I flew like a flash, tore open the shutters and threw up the sash. The moon on the breast of the new-fallen snow gave a luster of midday to objects below, when what to my wondering eyes did appear but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer, with a little old driver so lively and quick, I knew in a moment he must be St. Nick.
More rapid than eagles, his coursers they came, and he whistled and shouted and called them by name. Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen, on Comet, on Cupid, on Donner, on Blitzen, to the top of the porch, to the top of the wall. Now dash away all.
As leaves that before the wild hurricane fly, when they meet with an obstacle, mount to the sky. So up to the housetop the coursers they flew, with the sleigh full of toys and St. Nicholas too. And then in a twinkling I heard on the roof the prancing and pawing of each little hoof.
As I drew in my head and was turning around, down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound. He was dressed all in fur, from his head to his foot, and his clothes were all tarnished with ashes and soot. A bundle of toys he had flung on his back, and he looked like a peddler just opening his pack.
His eyes, how they twinkled, his dimples, how merry. His cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow, and the beard on his chin was as white as the snow. The stump of a pipe he held tight in his teeth, and the smoke it encircled his head like a wreath. He had a broad face and a little round belly that shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly.
He was chubby and plump, a right jolly old elf, and I laughed when I saw him in spite of myself. A wink of his eye and a twist of his head soon gave me to know I had nothing to dread. He spoke not a word, but went straight to his work, and filled all the stockings, then turned with a jerk, and laying his finger aside of his nose, and giving a nod, up the chimney he rose.
He sprang to his sleigh, to his team gave a whistle, and away they all flew like the down of a thistle. But I heard him exclaim ere he drove out of sight, "Happy Christmas to all, and to all a good night."
Mary Bingham has a personal family Christmas tradition to share in this week's Minute with Mary.
Family traditions are very special this time of year, whether some gather with family to celebrate the winter solstice, Christmas, Hanukkah, or Kwanzaa. My mother always made the holidays very special. One of our many traditions was to sign a tablecloth every year beginning in 1977. It was always fun to see how her children, her grandchildren, and her great-grandchildren grew through the years with the art and poetry that would accompany the signatures. Mom spent several months sewing our linen creation with great joy as she rocked in her chair preparing the tablecloth for the following Christmas. Now that Mom is no longer here, our family will be sure to keep that tradition alive. The number of tablecloths is now at 3 and will continue to grow with each generation. Thanks, Mom.
Thank you, Mary.
And now Sarah has End Witch Hunts news.
And Witch Hunts news. As we wrap up our final news segment of 2024, we want to express our heartfelt gratitude for your incredible support throughout the year. Your financial contributions have made it possible for us to continue producing this podcast and creating educational content that reaches people worldwide. Please consider including us in your holiday giving by going to our donation page linked in the episode notes. This holiday season, while we embrace the spirit of giving and show kindness to our families, neighbors, and local communities, let's remember that although violence knows no borders, love is not bound by borders. Let's continue to prioritize loving humanity actively across borders into the new year. Speaking of the new year, we invite you to join us for a special in-person gathering, remembering the innocent victims of the Connecticut Witch Trials on February 1st, 2025 at 1 p.m. at the Old State House in Hartford, Connecticut. Whether you're jotting this down in that fresh calendar you just bought or the one Santa tucked into your stocking, be sure to mark this free public event so that you can share about it and attend it. We want to see you. You'll find a link to the digital event program and more information in the show notes. As 2024 draws to a close, we must remember that our work extends beyond mere remembrance. The stories of those who lost their lives in gender-based violence and witchcraft accusations must not fade into history. They must serve as lessons that guide us forward. Please join us here on Witch Hunt again in 2025 as we continue learning how we can end witch hunts together.
Thank you, Sarah.
You're welcome.
And thank you for joining us on this special Christmas episode of Witch Hunt.
Visit witchhuntshow.com to see our back catalog and tune in again next week.
Have great holidays and a beautiful new year.